Can we just talk? We just talk. Can we just talk about where we're going?
In the 1930s, an extraordinary crisis gripped our nation, the Great Depression. Laissez-faire economics had concentrated power in Wall Street and big business. The economy crashed and put millions of people out of work. The old political and economic order, government of, by, and for the elites, had failed on a scale never before seen in our history, and yet that old order still clung to power. Across America, people took to the streets demanding fundamental change. When the International Ladies Garment Workers Union called for action, 70,000 dressmakers walked out. On the West Coast, longshore workers from Seattle to San Diego went on strike. On July 5th, 1934, police in San Francisco attacked these workers, and the Embarcadero ran red with blood. In America's heartland, farmers led protests demanding a moratorium on mortgage foreclosures. They set up roadblocks to prevent sheriffs and bank agents from auctioning off family farms. Desperate for a new direction, new ideas, and new leaders, America turned to a new president, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. FDR and the leaders of his administration, like Henry A. Wallace, understood that this historic crisis required a fearless and visionary response from a government determined to put the United States back to work. The answer was the New Deal. The New Deal created jobs for millions of Americans, but it was not just about fixing a short-term problem. It was about addressing deep social, economic, and environmental needs. It was a massive investment in the infrastructure. Future generations. It was about government setting the ground rules for industry so it could no longer run roughshod over the interests of the nation and its people. Make no mistake, the New Deal was fiercely opposed by those vested interests, and Henry Wallace, FDR's Secretary of Agriculture and later the Vice President, was one of the most vilified leaders in the New Deal, only because he dared to believe democracy must put people first and dollars second. The story of the Great Depression is a story of how people from all walks of life stepped up, worked together, and pulled our nation out of economic and environmental ruin. Now, however, we face another crisis, one that fundamentally threatens the future of our country and the world. Climate change is fueling massive social, economic, and political disruptions, threatening food system collapse, drought, devastating weather events, and mass migration. Now, it is disproportionately hurting the people who did the least to cause it. The science is clear. If we don't act now, the consequences will be irreversible.
On behalf of the Sunrise Movement, I want to welcome everyone joining us here at Whitman College and also those who are watching online. Thank you for sharing your time and for participating and for caring about this important issue. My wife and I find growing and sharing food to be the best possible solution in fighting for a sustainable world. I lived in the Caribbean and in Ecuador, helping start gardens and doing small actions in building community resiliency. Since then, I've been working on small farms and nurseries for about 3 years. I spend every day trying to learn, listen, and understand what it means to be a farmer and what it means to be a laborer. Of course, this problem is bigger than just my family. I joined Sunrise Movement to take political action against the existential threat of climate change. Sunrise is a national movement led by youth like me that are fighting to make climate change a priority across America and to elect leaders who stand up for the health and well-being of our planet and our people. The Green New Deal aims to meet this challenge through 5 goals. First, to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions through a just transition for all communities. Second, to create millions of jobs and ensure prosperity for all people. Third, to invest in infrastructure for the 21st century. Fourth, to secure community resilience, healthy food, access to nature, and a sustainable environment for generations to come. And fifth, to promote justice and equity by stopping current, preventing future, and repairing historic oppression of indigenous peoples, communities of color, migrant communities, depopulated rural communities, the poor, women, the elderly, the unhoused, people with disabilities, and the youth. These are lofty objectives, but at the very least, I think we can all agree that reaching these goals would benefit every American. Remember that the Green New Deal, at this moment, is a framework for political change. Concrete policies are being hammered out with the participation of affected communities across all issues. Our purpose here tonight is to start this public discussion and to decide how it is possible to reach these goals. The climate crisis touches every aspect of our lives. We could spend weeks on every issue. For tonight, though, we will focus on agriculture as it pertains to our community. Our farmers and our farm workers are affected by climate change and also have the most direct ability to implement environmental stewardship. Those who do not work in agriculture need to better understand how much farmers have done to ensure that their land is economically and environmentally sustainable. We need discussion without judgment. We need to understand what it means to run a family business, what it means to transition and to adapt, and also what it means to be scared of the future. We recognize that we are unable to represent all perspectives on this issue tonight, but we hope that our panelists tonight will ignite your desire to take initiative in our community, to listen, to speak, and to act. So now, I'd like to introduce our panelists and have them come up as I introduce them. So, starting out, our first panelist grew up in southeastern Africa and attended college in Walla Walla. He has had a long, distinguished, and varied career. His work includes serving as a biologist with the U.S. Forest Service, riparian restoration projects with conservation districts, and in counseling and public education. He has taught at Walla Walla Community College for 20 years and has co-authored 7 books and 2 nature film series. He has won awards for his work in conservation and education and serves on the board of several nonprofit community-focused groups. Please help me welcome Mike Denny. Our second panelist has been an organic farmer for over 25 years on his 400-acre farm in the heart of the Walla Walla Valley, where he, along with his family, grow a variety of grains without commercial fertilizers or pesticides. He also adds values to his grain as an organic food processor, milling and malting his own grains for local markets. Please welcome Joel Huesby. Our third panelist comes from working class roots and is a veteran of the U.S. Air Force. He has a master's degree in Homeland Security and an undergraduate degree in Criminal Justice, which he earned while deployed overseas. In addition to being a community organizer, he is involved in climate change activism and is a member of Sunrise Movement. He is currently running for Congress in Washington's 5th Congressional District. Let's hear it for Chris Armitage. Our fourth panelist is a co-chair of the Walla Walla chapter of Democratic Socialists of America. She holds a PhD in sociology, and she recently published the book Engendering Revolution: Women, Unpaid Labor, and Paternalism in Bolivarian Venezuela. For 20 years, she has worked with civil society organizations in North America and Southern Africa on children's rights, gender, housing, human rights, labor, public health, and youth issues. Please welcome Rachel Elfenbein. Our fifth panelist is a Walla Walla native from a 6th-generation farming family. He graduated from Walla Walla Community College's Enology and Viticulture program in 2017 and works with his family's vineyard. He has extensive experience with sustainable agricultural certification programs. He's also currently helping to create a certification program specifically for the Walla Walla Valley and an educational initiative focused on native plants and beneficial insects. Let's welcome Sager Small. So again, the night will go as follows. Each panelist will have 7 minutes to talk about their understanding of the Green New Deal and agriculture in the Valley. And then we'll have a brief intermission to gather the cards, your question cards, and then we'll have a discussion after that. So let's get started.
I have lived here in this valley since 1978, and I have had great privilege of working with literally hundreds of landowners in this basin when I worked for the Conservation District. And I also got to work with a lot of ranchers and sheep folks when I worked for the U.S. Forest Service. And what I've discovered is that we have a vast diversity of individuals that have all kinds of different expertise. And many of these people work very, very hard. And what I discovered was that at times they were experiencing all kinds of difficulties, like the emergence of brand new weeds or insects, lower water tables, all kinds of things that didn't used to exist in this basin. And so years ago, I started observing all kinds of things that were occurring in this basin. And as I would be out on producers' lands looking at projects that we were going to do, I would suddenly see that we had a weed that none of us had ever seen before, or we had erosion taking place in a way we had never seen it, or we had alkaline salts appearing in areas that we hadn't observed them before. So it became a real challenge in doing these restoration projects to figure out what on earth was going on. And that's when I started really taking close looks at soils, and I started visiting with my good friend Bob Carson a lot more. And I was extremely concerned about what I was seeing. And as time has progressed, I've started to observe all kinds of new species of plants in the basin. New bird species have arrived here that there are no records prior to the late 70s, into the 80s, and into the early 90s. We have insects that have arrived that we've never seen before in this basin. And we even have arachnids that have arrived here that we've never seen before. And so I look at all these non-native species that have come into this basin, and I got pretty excited over some of them. I got really concerned over others. And then we started to have mammals appear. We had moose appear. We had the Virginia possum appear. We had all kinds of other animals just suddenly start appearing in the Blue Mountains. And that started to cause all kinds of questions. What on earth is going on? And we had an apex predator wander into the Blues, the gray wolf. And we wondered where on earth it was going to fit, because it had been absent for 100 years. And so we see these things changing and occurrences of species we have never had to deal with. We have the brown marmorated stink bug that's arrived. We have a burr from the Midwest called buffalo burr pop up. It's in this valley now. We have yellow star thistle that when I arrived in 1978 was virtually unknown still. And now it's everywhere. It's a dominant, serious weed issue. We have had kochia appear. We have tumbleweeds. We've had all kinds of things appear. And so I look at this, and I also keep a very good eye on the weather. And what I've started to notice is that we have started to get longer, warmer, drier falls that go clear into December. And we have shorter, more severe winters. And we have longer, wetter springs. And that has a drastic effect on wildlife, on farming, and on erosion. And so it's become a real concern. So I know that each one of you have experienced all kinds of issues in the last 15 to 20 years that prior to that you probably never have faced before. And so I find it extremely interesting what I'm seeing, what I'm witnessing. And having lived here since '78, I have been here relatively short time. I haven't been here generations. But what I've seen in just that short time has been a real eye-opener. So.
So my name's Joel Huesby, and it really is my pleasure to share with you a bit today. Our family homesteaded in 1908, and our grandkids now are the 6th generation on the same land. I've been an organic farmer, as I said earlier, for a generation now, and that's come with a lot of benefits and a lot of learning curve. And I've made, as I said, often many mistakes, a lot more than my neighbors all put together. But during that time, I learned a few things about the soil and about crops and livestock and how they all fit together. And today, we grow hundreds and hundreds of tons of different kinds of grains on this 400 acres annually, and we've done that without fertilizers or pesticides. So we've kind of figured out a thing or two on this. But I kind of come at it from a little bit different perspective, if you will. And so don't throw tomatoes at me or anything, but I don't really see it so much as a crisis as I do an opportunity. Mankind has been influencing, or humankind influencing his environment since he rubbed 2 sticks together. And that continues on today, so I kind of take a little bit of perspective to this whole thing. So I look at it as an opportunity to learn, to grow, to innovate, and to adapt. That's how I kind of see it. And so with that, I would like to kind of go back 30,000 feet at least on the political side, because that's kind of trying to pigeonhole this thing into the topic that we're in tonight, and then come back to the farm through water and soil issues. On the federal level, okay, so we're thinking, how can we influence public policy to change what happens in agriculture as it relates to the changing environment? And right now, kind of the answer is not much. And maybe it's because I've got a few years under my belt. I'm 55 now. Maybe I'm a little bit jaded, perhaps. But the fact is, when then candidate Obama was running for president in 2007 down in Pendleton, I raised my hand and he called on me and he spoke to me for 17 minutes on a question of the Farm Bill. What's your policy? And he told me a lot of great things about how he wanted to change the Farm Bill and have it be more friendly for the environment, for diversity, for organic agriculture, for local food economies, and the like. But the fact is that he's the chief executive, and it's Congress who has the purse strings. And Congress is kind of deadlocked, as you know. And not to throw cold water on stuff, but the next Farm Bill won't come up until 2023. And this last one here is $900 billion. 80% of it doesn't even go to farmers. It goes to food stamps, supplemental nutrition and assistance program stuff. And within the 20%, a significant portion of that remaining goes to the Forest Service. So what actually goes to agriculture is even a sliver of that. Then within that, of the 5 big commodities, corn takes about 40% of it. And then there's wheat, soybeans, cotton, and one other one. Those combined almost equal the same as corn. Within corn, for instance, 40% of corn goes to ethanol, which is really kind of an energy neutral crop as far as running in our cars with gas. And then 36% is fed to livestock, 20% is exported, and about 4% is eaten as food, though it's the biggest crop in our today. So there's a lot of things that are kind of upside down when it comes to that that I don't know if we can change right now. So I'm kind of like, well, I can't do that, but here's what I can do on my farm. And so when I go back to this whole deal about climate change, what happens if I had an extra 2 weeks of the year to, well, I might get a second crop in. I can use technology like center pivots to irrigate more efficiently, okay? I can find different crops that are adapted to that new environment. You know, it's kind of like dinosaurs. You either adapt or you go extinct. And that's kind of how I see it. So if the snow runs off quicker because it's warmer and it melts, then what I'm interested in is farm pond storage. where I can take existing water rights, existing infrastructure, put that water in my ground and groundwater recharge, or pull some out for my crops because the snow didn't last as long. So I'm always looking for innovative ways to solve these problems that I can do without having to wait for some federal money or some fairy tale thing. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what I do. Thanks.
Hope nobody minds if I stand. So I'm very appreciative to be here to talk about the Green New Deal and the future of our nation, the future of our community. I'm here to talk about the political side of it in particular. How do we help our communities in need? Now, right now, I can tell you that we have never had trouble paying for bombs. I have personally guarded billions of dollars worth of bombs, and we never had to lobby or fight for that funding. Nobody ever asked, how are you going to pay for World War II? How are you going to pay for Korea? How are you going to pay for Vietnam? How are you going to pay for the Cold War? How are you going to pay for Iraq and Afghanistan? But when it comes to cutting our SNAP benefits, to not helping our farmers and our rural communities, when areas of Washington, some of our counties in the 5th Congressional District have over 10% unemployment, have over a third of the population under the poverty line, suddenly there's no room in the budget. And that is where the Green New Deal comes in, and that is why I'm proud to be up here advocating for it. Now, recently, one of the primary authors of the Green New Deal came on to our campaign. Her name's Sarah Smith. And she has spoken explicitly about how this will help Eastern Washington, how this can help Walla Walla, how we can not just bring people gainful, good employment through the green economy, but we can help our farming and rural communities. Now, as it stands, Purdue, the leaders of the Department of Agriculture, the corporations that are running the Department of Agriculture are telling us, get big or get out. And that needs to end. We need to bring opportunities to everybody because that's independence. We are not able to pursue life, liberty, and happiness as long as we are not able to have an economically viable opportunity to produce our own goods. And this is the promise of the Green New Deal. This is what we have the opportunity to bring. Now, the Green New Deal is a House resolution. It's just a goal, it's a target to say that we can invest once again, just like we did before. We led the world when it came to building dams and to building all these great things and to going to the moon. And if we can't have a similarly powerful, large movement to help our communities, then what are we doing? We have an obligation to take care of the American people and to take care of the people of Walla Walla. And what I want to help do for Eastern Washington and with the Green New Deal and with the Sunrise Movement and with the amazing folks here, I want to end the era of flyover states. I want to end the era of flyover counties. I want to end the era of flyover people and bring the power to the folks in this room. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. First, I want to say thank you to the Sunrise Movement organizers for hosting this very important town hall tonight, and I'm happy to be here. I'm Rachel Elfenbein, and I'm going to start off my talk by taking what might first seem like a bit of a detour from Walla Walla and the issue of climate change. I'm speaking on behalf of the Democratic Socialists of America, or DSA, tonight, but I also want to speak from experience. From what I've seen and heard bearing witness to those who experience violence at the hands of their intimate partners. And I promise to tie those experiences to the need for a Green New Deal in our region. Just over 5 years ago, I worked as a domestic violence counselor in Philadelphia. One day, a mother who was a woman of color called me looking for domestic violence shelter. She told me that she and her child had left her abuser. She worked a minimum wage job, but she could not afford to rent a safe home for her and her child independently of her abuser. Instead, they were living in a public shelter that did not have sufficient safety measures to protect them. And I had to deny her and her child safe shelter because the one domestic violence shelter in the city at that time was full. Her story was not unique. At the time, on average, 24 requests for domestic violence shelter in Philadelphia had to be denied every single day because sufficient shelter for survivors and their children did not exist. I highlight this woman's story because it stuck with me. Here she was doing everything to quote unquote pull herself up from her bootstraps. She was working a job, taking care of her kid on her own, leaving her abuser, seeking assistance from services purported to help her. And yet, because of multiple policy failures, our economy and our society failed her. She and her child were just barely surviving. Her story is our story. It is a US American story. The most recent survey from 2018 found that on one day alone, 6,972 requests in the US for domestic violence shelter and housing went unmet. That's in one day alone in our country. In 2019, a full-time worker earning the average renter's wage could afford a two-bedroom market rental apartment in only 10% of US counties. Last year in Walla Walla County, the hourly wage necessary to afford a market rate two-bedroom rental apartment was $18.69 an hour, while the minimum wage was $12 an hour. Half of all renters in Walla Walla and Columbia counties were living in housing that they could not afford. That's half of all people in our region who were renting. At the same time, suicide rates are rising in the US, and suicide is now the second leading cause of death in our country for young people ages 15 to 34. 3 recent studies have found that increasing the minimum wage in the United States would correspond with lowering the suicide rate. So some of you might be thinking, what does this have to do with our environment, our climate crisis, and the Green New Deal? My answer is that these US social, economic, and public health crises are deeply related to the environmental crisis that the Green New Deal is designed to address. As many of you are probably aware, in 2018, the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change found unequivocally that, quote, without societal transformation and rapid implementation of ambitious greenhouse gas reduction measures, pathways to limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius will be exceedingly difficult, if not impossible, to achieve. As the story I shared shows, we are facing multiple crises in addition to ecological breakdown. Deepening inequality, precarious jobs, racism, gender violence, hostility towards immigrants of color, the undermining of our democracy, and endless wars make up the context upon which climate destabilization is unleashed. The most vulnerable members of society are hit hardest, first, and suffer the most. Hurricanes Katrina and Harvey and the California wildfires have already showed us this, and the worst polluters largely have not paid the costs of this climate destruction. Corporations profiting from fossil fuel extraction have long campaigned to turn workers against environmentalists, claiming that clean energy would be a job killer. But working class and poor people's quality of life, gravely threatened by climate disruption, would greatly improve in a just transition to renewable energy. And the Green New Deal provides us with this framework for a just transition, particularly for those hit hardest by these multiple crises. Bernie Sanders' Green New Deal plan would launch a decade of nationwide mobilization centered around justice and equity. Climate change would be factored into virtually every area of policy, from immigration to trade to foreign policy and beyond. His plan would reach 100% renewable energy for electricity and transportation by 2030 and set clear goals to fully decarbonize our economy. As the video showed, the Green New Deal draws inspiration from the original New Deal, which mobilized the nation and put 7 million people back to work during the Great Depression. Confronting the crises we face now, the Green New Deal will use full employment as a crucial tool to avert climate catastrophe. Its proposal to meet all of the U.S.'s power demands with renewable zero-emissions energy will require coordinated collective action to replace, upgrade, and develop our infrastructure. The jobs to develop our infrastructure will be high-wage union jobs. The Green New Deal calls for free education and training to enable millions of workers to take up and do these green jobs. And this could be a boon for our community college, which is currently struggling, but already has green education programs. Green jobs will be in other critical environmental sectors like regenerative agriculture, soil and ecosystem restoration, environmental impact mitigation, climate adaptation, and reinvestment in an expansion of our national parks and forests. At the same time, the Green New Deal would expand public resources for low-carbon sectors like healthcare, education, and domestic work, because these will be crucial to our zero-carbon economy. A key goal of the Green New Deal is to guarantee a job with a family-sustaining wage, adequate family and medical leave, paid vacations, and retirement security to all people of the United States. Importantly, the Green New Deal ties together environmental justice with social and economic justice, overcoming a common pitfall pitting environmental interests against workers' interests. It affirms the right of all people to health care and safe, affordable housing. Thus, the Green New Deal can become massively popular because it can improve people's lives in ways that they can understand and that they're willing to fight for. This weaving together of environmental security, social security, and economic security in a broad collective effort is especially important for our region, where we have a housing crisis, and around 1 out of every 5 people in our region is on food stamps. As a society, we can no longer place burdens of climate change on poor and working class folks. Instead, we need to place the burden on the primary culprits, the industries that profit from burning fossil fuels. We need to tax them to fund our necessary decarbonization efforts, and we need policies that regulate firms, requiring that their production does not pollute our environment. This is precisely why we need our government to mandate the Green New Deal. It must be a public sector program, outside of the control of the corporations that profit from burning fossil fuels. Thus, the Green New Deal is also a tool to help us to get money out of politics and strengthen our democracy, a tool to strengthen our democracy. National in scope, the Green New Deal is also about engaging with people locally, addressing their concerns, and improving their lives. It is about building community health, starting with the communities that are on the front lines of these crises. The Green New Deal is a roadmap towards a future that is a public good, and that is good for the public, where nationwide programs could provide free school meals that ensure that no child goes hungry. Medicare for all makes healthcare a human right. Agriculture is ecologically regenerative, and we collectively control our energy systems to provide renewable electricity for all. This is a vision for the ecological reconstruction of our society in which people, like the mother and child I mentioned, would not have to depend on another breadwinner to survive. Through the Green New Deal's just transition, our economy, no longer based on fossil fuel extraction, will be based on care. Care for the environment that sustains us and care for each other and our communities. And if you're interested in DSA, we have a table in the back where you walked in before you came into the auditorium, so thank you.
Hello, everybody. I apologize in advance. I'm going to be relying on my notes. So when I was asked to be part of this panel, they gave us 2 prompt questions, and I think that's where I'm just going to start head on. One of the first questions was, what is your understanding of the Green New Deal as it pertains to agriculture? And in parentheses behind that, I have viticulture. So I'm just going to go straight into that. So my understanding of the Green New Deal is that it is a federal program with the priority of making the United States carbon neutral within 10 years and ensuring an unpolluted habitat for all people. In doing so, our government would incentivize green or sustainable practices in favor of outdated, inefficient, or polluting methods. Accomplishing this would involve a large mobilization and the creation of numerous jobs in the green sector pertaining to education, retraining, technologies, research, development, and renovation. I believe that ultimately the Green New Deal can make family farms more competitive by providing access to resources and government incentives that had previously only been available to larger corporate farms. The end goal being the strengthening of the following: the long-term economic sustainability of our agricultural industry. B, policies that emphasize future gains over momentary profits. And C, agrarians' connection and stewardship of the land, air, and water of which we all subsist. And then the second question in the prompt was, I'm paraphrasing here, but how can policies that affect my industry help affect change against climate change? And so just as an industry, the wine growing, winemaking industry, it's very, very vast, and it can go so many directions because you have the vineyard, you have this production, seller side, sales and marketing, and all of that. But when I started thinking about it, it made more sense for me to kind of explain things maybe that worked for us and things that we did and I think would work under the Green New Deal. So one example, I remember reading in the Green New Deal, they were talking about supply chain and perhaps reform therein. And just, I want to share an experience from my business. We just recently renovated our packaging, so new glass and label, and we decided to switch our sourcing, which at its furthest was sourced from France. So we would buy the bottles, ship them out here. And so since making that change, we've started sourcing lighter weight glass, which is good. We're not spending as much energy on shipping. The cost goes down for us, so there's an economic incentive there. And it's also sourced from Seattle, Washington. So we, it's not having to go as far, less carbon input. And it's kind of a win-win. And I think that things like that are what is going to work for the agricultural industry, things that make sense on several different levels like that. And just one more example I'd like to share. As my introduction stated, I've been in the vineyard, working in the vineyard along with my hand crew for the last going on 3 years, and we've been trying some new things out since I've been starting to step into management. And in the Green New Deal, I noticed that there was a little bit about habitat regeneration, restorative agriculture, and based on the work that my father had done a little bit earlier, placing green belts in the vineyards, I believe we have maybe 2.5 to 3.5 acres that are just reserved for biodiversity, junipers, ponderosas, prairie grasses, native grasses, and things like that, just for, biodiversity, insects. We also started not mowing the inter-row grasses as much. They're all dryland grasses, they reseed. And so we created habitat, and so we, just by not mowing, not running the tractor as much, we were able to create a space and a habitat for beneficial insects. And we're talking lacewings, ladybugs, earwigs, we consider them beneficial, praying mantises. And they all predate on a common vineyard pest, which is leafhopper, variegated leafhopper. And so essentially, long story short, we saved ourselves a chemical, having to use a chemical input, an insecticide, just by letting the grass grow and providing habitat. So that's less tractor hours, less carbon, and we didn't have to spray, which has collateral with other insects as well. And so just to wrap it up, I think convincing the farmer and the ag workers that it's in their best interest is what it's all about. It has to make sense economically, or you have to show them that there's going to be a less labor-intensive path, or just a safer or cleaner way to do business. Thank you.
To be honest, I don't know where to start. I was 6 when I knew what I wanted to be. You're only 2 now, but sometimes, I swear, I can already see it in your eyes. It was your granddad who got me into it. Put me in charge of my own acreage at 16. Boy, I had so many ideas. Heck, I was pretty confident about what I was doing. The innovations, truly becoming more and more sustainable. I felt like I was on a mission. And if I'm really honest, I still can't fully wrap my head around how it didn't work. But now we're here at a point where continuing just doesn't make sense anymore. Your mother and I are selling the farm. Every single acre. We talked to the bank and the realtor. It's going up tomorrow morning. And we're just gonna move to the city, because it'll be a brighter future. And I want you to understand why. It's not just the drought getting worse every year. We were working to stay ahead of that, but costs keep running up and prices keep going down. Then one day you wake up in a place where one bad season can knock you and everyone you care about right over. And that's not a good place. I worry about how much we've invested out here. And at the same time, I can't help but think about what that investment brought us. It used to be nothing but desert here, and now there's so much potential in the soil. But it seems like nobody cares. And that's why we're leaving. I don't want to plant a dream in you only for you to find out later that it's not a living. And that people don't understand, or worse, they don't care. They just blame everything on you. And you start losing your pride. And that's no life. The farm is everything to me, and I want you to know that. But my family means even more. So everything that I do, in the end, it's gotta be for you.
To debate over climate change, does agriculture have a seat at the table, and are we a part of the problem or part of the solution?
Oh my gosh, I think that we are the solution to climate change. We have not had the conversation that we actually can offset carbon from the fossil fuel sector. And we are cycling carbon. We are biogenic carbon, very, very different from fossil fuel-based carbon.
The potential answer to a lot of our issues is right beneath us in the soil. We've been farming for centuries, and we're just now really learning about the ability of the soil to not only hold water and nutrients, but also sequester carbon and improve our environment. I'm inspired every day by our peers. We monitor our soils with GPS, and we know to the point how to manage our soils.
That's really something, isn't it?
Holding capacity, increase crop productivity, and increase carbon sequestration.
You're superheroes.
Our time is now, but we only have about 30 harvest cycles left to get it right. That is more important now than ever. I see the future is bright. We focus every day on
Let's go home.
Yeah.
It's a very exciting time to be in farming because we will be one of the first industries to have a negative carbon footprint.
So last but not least, our moderator for the discussion section tonight is a lead faculty member of the Applied Sciences program in agricultural systems at the Walla Walla Community College. Originally from Montana, she studied agroecology, anthropology, soil science at the University of Wyoming. She holds a PhD in crop and soil sciences from Michigan State University. In her teaching and research, she focuses on resiliency in agricultural systems. She is particularly interested in the impacts of agricultural management on both the human and environmental condition. Please give a welcome to Erin Anders. Dr. Erin Anders.
First off, I'd like to ask each one of you to say what perspectives, your panel members, so what other perspectives within the agricultural community in Walla Walla do you think are missing from this panel that could bring a lot to the discussion? Sager, do you want to start since you have the microphone?
I think there's a very obvious one. It's the Latin American perspective.
Okay.
Yeah, just kind of to echo that, farm workers.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with them here. While we have some great perspectives, also some of the folks, who are feeling the hurt right now. Maybe someone who was recently put out of business or has really suffered intense consequences as a result of what's already happened.
Irrigation districts and watershed councils and partnerships.
One group that I think should be here is just the average daily consumer.
Okay, great. So here's my question to you. So I see a farmer population missing. We have, two farmers, but there's a large number of farmers missing here. So it's a long question, so bear with me. Farmers have an intimate relationship with the land and arguably are one of the most affected by climate change. They have the solutions. However, it is their unequal access to resources, misinformed consumer populations, and policies that are meant to line the pockets of oil-dependent corporations behind the many restraining policies that limit their implementation of regenerative practices. So, how does the Green New Deal abate these many challenges so that they can harness ecosystem services, more diverse markets, and inputs that are not cost prohibitive?
Sustainable agriculture and practices have been around and they predate any modern society. They are more profitable currently and more capable of working effectively than modern solutions. Many of the modern activities around these systems are built just to create more profit. These large corporations throw billions of dollars into our elections, and then they write the laws to make it much more difficult for farming and rural communities. And they mandate that you need to create all these different plans and you need to use these different products, and these corporations get you into these binding legal contracts. But when we strip those things away, it's much more effective and efficient and leads to more independence to remove a lot of the modern practices and to facilitate people's ability to decide how they're going to run things and to create sustainable systems. The environment existed far before modern farming techniques. And just like what was mentioned before about letting the grass grow, and that allowed the bugs to be there, and they didn't need pesticides. That's not a new thing. That's returning to what worked in the past. So when we get away the subsidies, when we stop throwing money at fossil fuel companies and big ag companies, and these large corporations, you're actually able to do what you need to do.
Yes, that's what the question's saying, but how does the Green New Deal facilitate that is the big question.
Perhaps it could advocate for living local economies. So in reducing your carbon footprint, one of those things is reducing food miles. And you reduce food miles by having local infrastructure for processing those goods that we grow on our farms, and for then having market access to do that kind of stuff. And, you know, for me, it's like, well, if you can't win in a big boys game, go play your own game, make your own rules. And that's kind of what we've done. You know, there's ways. That said, I still have to jump many hoops. I'm a Washington State Department of Ag food processor license, Oregon Department of Agriculture food processor license, Food and Drug Administration processing establishment. So jumped a lot of hoops to be able to do that. Those are some barriers, but I don't disagree with the barriers I had to jump so that the public is ensured of a safe product.
One thing that we need to keep in mind, and that is that the original New Deal is what created the conservation districts in every county in this nation. And it was through those conservation deals that they started to replant upland native grasslands, riparian buffers, and stop the wind erosion in the Midwest, and reseeded and recovered vast thousands of acres. And right now, in many parts of the United States, just in 2012, my wife and I went and did a Dust Bowl tour of the central U.S., Oklahoma, Texas, Colorado. And what we discovered was that the same problems are cropping up again. Vast, huge conglomerates are farming these areas, and if it plays out, they leave it alone, and it's just gone to weeds in bare soil. And that was really concerning. But the thing to keep in mind is, in this basin, there are over 200 landowners, ag folks, that have made the correct choice, and they have asked for CRP, or they have asked for CREP programs and re-establishment of buffer areas along the rivers and streams, put it into native grasslands, and it has made a huge difference because we don't have the vast dust storms we used to have. And these are people that made that choice in this county alone. So there's over 200 miles of restored riparian buffers in Walla Walla County alone, which is 26% of all the restored riparian in the state of Washington. So that's what landowners have chosen to do here, which is an outstanding opportunity for carbon sequestration, because we already have it on the ground in this county. So
I can just add that, I mean, that's the question. That's the question I think we need to figure out. I think kind of to what I was talking about, what I was saying earlier, that, I mean, for farmers, it's just gonna have to make sense. It's either gonna have to be economic, or make their life easier, or be some kind of an ethical argument that's gonna get people to do a lot of this stuff. One thing, I don't know if it was mentioned in the Green New Deal, but I think something like a robust marketplace of ideas and things that work for some people, so people can share ideas and things like that, I think would help. But that's all I got.
Okay, great. So from the audience, what is the definition of a large corporate farm? Because we have a lot of family farms that are corporations.
I think it's going to depend on what you're farming.
Yeah, I'd like to hear from the folks on the stage who are probably the best people to speak on it. For sure.
Well, I think that in the United States, 97% of the farms in the United States are family farms. Okay. Of those farms that are corporate farms, and by large you might say maybe over $1 million in annual sales or something like that, they make up maybe 10% of that. The vast majority of farms, 75% of them, that is sales of less than $50,000, is the lower end that most family farms fall into. So there's kind of like this top echelon. And by the way, that top 10% also supplies about a little over half of the food, by the way. So.
Also, what is the definition in the Green New Deal of sustainable agriculture?
Well, I don't know. Sustainable agriculture is, being able to grow crops year after year with livestock and not deplete your resources.
Yeah, I mean, we want to keep our land arable. We want to keep our land arable, our air and water clean, our environment, non-toxic. We want our air, we want the climate to be stable. It's about what's sustainable for humanity. Right now, we are facing a crisis, and it's urgent that we act. So non-sustainable agriculture is going to be anything that contributes to the problem instead of helping us solve it.
I can just add something related to that. I think food sovereignty plays into sustainable agriculture and communities' control over their own food and being able to feed our community first before we export our food. And I think that's one of the keys to a just transition towards sustainable agriculture.
So one of the things about sustainability is that at times it can kind of be a nebulous concept and not really be defined, but I guess that would be up to when the Green New Deal moves further, that we'd agree on a set of standards. But also one of the principles that I keep seeing again and again and again in these sustainability programs, it is always a step every year, a small thing. It's progressive and it keeps getting better, and you keep checking things off, making the changes you want to do over time. And as long as that's really there, then we're going to keep improving, and we can assess how fast we want to make that happen.
Okay, so there in this valley, there are several farmers and farm families that have been farming the same land and expanding their land for over 100 years. They're very viable, profitable. They are adopting sustainable practices. Would you consider them sustainable under the Green New Deal?
Again, I don't know enough to comment on that, but I think it would have to be something that would have to be agreed to. We'd have to agree to a standard, like a set standard.
And to be clear, the Green New Deal is a House resolution. It's a target. That's something that we discuss and we work on and we develop. We talk to the folks that we want to work with and that we're trying to be allies to, so that we can find the standards that get us to that goal, and we don't just solve and defeat, the existential crisis of climate change, but we also solve a lot of the problems of poverty and underemployment and unemployment and these other challenges that we're facing hand in hand with the communities that we're serving.
Just a comment, from a biological standpoint, I always look at what are the requirements for sustainability, and one of those requirements is water. And what I'm starting to observe is that water is going to become a much more precious resource than most of us currently consider it. And I look at sustainable agriculture as something that is going to be so closely tied to judicial use of water. And I get really concerned when I see us growing crops on soils that don't retain moisture. And it's like, how can we continue to dump hundreds of millions of gallons of water on this soil for a crop that may not be a sustainable crop? And so I'm not the one that's going to go out and decide what crops grow where, but I'll tell you, I am very concerned about our water and our water resources. And we have all kinds of demands being made on our water, and we have tribal rights to certain fishes in the water. We have all kinds of municipalities that want that water. And so I'm looking at water and sustainable ag And I see where right now, I believe when I was in the conservation business, it was about 64% of all water went to ag in this county. So that's a lot of water. But I think as our population continues to grow here, municipalities are going to say, we deserve more of that water. And corporations deserve more of that water. And so we're going to see a big change. So something to think about.
Okay, so moving on. That was one question, I guess, right, Amy? We're kind of moving them all together. Okay, so I think kind of moving from that question, this is a really relevant next step. So verbatim on here, a large roadblock to being able to pass environmental legislation that would both create jobs and protect the environment is the fact that it is such a partisan issue when it really shouldn't be. And I think we heard that just from answering these last few questions. How do we make things like the Green New Deal not partisan? And what can individuals do to help, and who needs to be at the table?
I think a big part of that is exactly what we're doing in here. The work of the Sunrise Movement in particular, which we have 2 hubs here in Washington's 5th District, has been incredible. At the climate strike in Spokane a few months ago, we had 2,500 people show up in downtown Spokane, and Governor Inslee showed up as well. We are bringing the message to the people. We're breaking past the mainstream media bubble to actually speak to folks in their communities, hear them, hear their concerns, and then have a dialogue about how crucial it is that we have a livable planet and workable land, and so things that are sustainable and self-sufficient too. And so that's part of why I appreciate everybody being here and the work of the Sunrise Movement.
Yeah, and to echo what you're saying as well, Chris, I think the Green New Deal in part addresses this and addresses this kind of historical pitfall between environmentalists and workers and unions. And so the Green New Deal would create millions of well-paying union jobs with benefits. And I think that's it's full employment is the ultimate the framework calls for full employment as a tool to avert climate catastrophe. And I think a lot of people will be on board with that. There's a lot of people who are working really bad jobs, who don't have benefits, who are working minimum wage, who don't have any savings for retirement, who don't have paid vacation. And that's appealing to millions of workers in this country. Most of the jobs that have been created since the Great Recession have been minimum wage jobs. And we have multiple crises because minimum wage isn't paying the bills for most people.
So one thing I think would be to enforce the antitrust laws we already have. Okay, so in the flower business, Ardent and ADM process over half of the flour in this country, and the top 6 process almost 80% of the flour. When you talk about protein, whether it's pork, beef, chicken, turkey, 4 companies process 86% of that, and then there's the rest. And so it's really difficult because of price fixing, barriers to entry and retail and such, to break into those markets. And so I think if they were broken up again, because it's basically a monopoly, they're price makers to the producers who are basically serfs to these large corporations for whether it's wheat or cow. They name the price and it's like it or leave it. That's what it is. So
kind of changing directions. What technologies does the Green New Deal support, or do you think should be supported in the Green New Deal that would be environmentally responsible and help agriculture meet these goals?
Well, one of those technologies for me would be center pivot irrigation, because you can water the same ground with about a third less water than you can with hand lines, at least in this valley. The other thing you can do is you can double crop. I can be watering half of a pivot while I'm harvesting the other half, and then it's planted the next day, as we did this last year, and you can just turn a crop over in a day or two instead of a couple weeks. So that gives me the whole ability to have a second income from that same land in 1 year. So those kind of technologies to spread a raindrop twice as far, keep the soil as a sponge with the carbon and the organic matter there, those things help a lot.
One thing that I have observed, I have the privilege of leading Sandhill Crane tours up in Othello, Washington. And they have amazing systems that they've put in, center pivot and other systems that have all kinds of monitors in the ground, tells them exactly when they need to turn their water on and off, how much to run it. And it has saved them 30 to 35% costs in pumping alone. And that's a huge savings, and it saves a lot of water. And so it's really important. And so when I go out here and I see an old hand line running and the wind's just a whipping, and I know that water is just blowing off into the air, it's like, what a waste. And so I would much rather see us do some serious water conservation and say, you know, you need to have monitors in the ground. You need to have a system that is not going to be lost to evaporation.
So are you proposing that perhaps in the Green New Deal that there be a way for farmers to have access to those monitors and things? Because they're quite expensive and cost prohibitive.
They
I think
are.
most farmers would have them if they could afford them, but a hand line, you might
Conservation,
have to do that.
I'll tell you, the thing is all set up already. Conservation districts have access to all kinds of low percentage funding for projects like that. They can do it now. And so when I see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of acres being hand-lined, irrigated, I think, ooh, ouch, because we're all the loser for that. And I look at those landowners that are attempting to raise a crop, and they're pumping untold thousands of dollars worth of water to them, and they're losing it. And so I think if they contacted their conservation district, they could get a much better system in place, and that's already available.
So maybe in the Green New Deal, having access to those resources, because I'm sure perhaps they don't know that they're available to them.
Well, it's the same as the original New Deal, and that is the conservation districts were there then, and they're here now. And I'm telling you, ag has a golden goose sitting right there, and many ag folks are aware of it, and they utilize them. But we also have WSU Extension that's here. They do amazing information and training. We have a community college that does amazing training. And so I look at all these opportunities, and it is outstanding. And when I worked for conservation districts, I teach at community college, I know those people, and they're out there providing all kinds of information, and we have a lot of the ability to be very successful right now. And the Green New Deal could enhance that, but the base is there now. So it's outstanding.
So just getting the word out.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Did you have something to say, Jill? Okay. All right, next question. So, going down the line, what is one practical solution in agriculture in the Walla Walla Valley that you think could be implemented within the next 10 years to mitigate the challenges that the Green New Deal is attempting to address?
Yeah, it's me again.
That's fine.
So one thing that I do know, and that is that many ag folks, producers, have, by putting riparian buffers on their land if they're up against a river or stream, have not sustained the amount of erosion that they would otherwise. I do know that putting in cover crops is super important, especially in the western end of the county where precip is so low. I know that sustaining and maintaining that soil quality is so important. And what I'm finding is that a lot of folks are doing their very best. They're doing no-till farming. They're doing all kinds of things that the New Deal suggested 35, 40, 50, 60 years ago. And there are still a small percentage that are out there pulverizing their soil when they don't need to. And it's like, well, this is what worked for the family in the past. Well, it didn't work then, and it's not working now. And so what I see that needs to happen is that within the Green New Deal, there needs to be opportunities for outstanding education of anybody out there in the ag community that wants that education. They need to have that opportunity. Because what I'm finding is that scratching a living out of some of the soil in this area is difficult as all get out. And so it requires more acreage, not less acreage. And what I'm finding is that a lot of folks want to do the right thing. I did not meet one producer that didn't want to do the right thing. And so that was always a huge encouragement. So.
Yeah, I was just thinking it takes a lead cow through the gate before the rest follow. So it's kind of maybe showcasing farmers who are successful at doing things where they're using resources appropriately, and that could be an example for others to emulate.
And you know, from my perspective, facilitating the education and communication for people who are either new to the field and looking to enter it, or who want to be more sustainable but don't have the money or don't have the the knowledge on which directions to go. That's going to be one of the most important parts of it. Is we need a strong implementation plan to get the knowledge from the experts to folks and for them to be able to enact them.
So follow-up questions. So Mike, you said that you've not seen a farmer in 41 years, if my math is right, that isn't trying to do the right thing. So there's something besides, it's not that they don't want to do the right thing, there's something holding it back. What do you think in terms of owning versus renting land, or farmers not having the same access to resources for someone who can do cover cropping because they're looking 10 years into the future because they own the land, versus someone who's just trying to make a living today who can't even afford the inputs for their crop?
Right, and I know of those. I know of a fair number of families in this basin that have a real challenge in surviving and staying on their land. I know some that are doing very well because they have the ability to afford what they're doing. And it takes the ability to afford to farm. That's the bottom line. And I look at folks that are basically renting land, hoping to make enough off of the crops. What I've discovered is that there are all kinds of programs already in place that will assist them in all kinds of endeavors. If they want to grow a certain crop, they can certainly go for that. But it costs. And farming is a high-cost business. And that's why I love to see successful farms, because those folks are working extremely hard and they're doing their very best. And if you don't have enough acres, it does not matter what you're doing, you're not going to pull through it, simply because of the costs of farming. It's not something that someone gets into that is afraid of change or afraid of failure. It's going to happen. And unfortunate, that's just the reality of it. And there's no way to hand that to anyone on a silver platter and say, you're going to make it. The reality isn't that. So,
I might differ a little bit in so much as I think the difference between a big farm and a small farm that can be successful is just a period, a decimal point between zeros. In my opinion, I think you could, in 1 acre, you can grow a truck farm stuff that at a farmer's market for full retail that can make a lot of money. And on the other side of it, we have people with 20, 30,000 acres in the North County that make a good living growing wheat, but take subsidies to do that. So it's kind of like there's a huge variability in the size of farm that's still profitable. One thing for me, though, is that I never did like, dumping my homogeneous commodity with everybody else. It's all mixed together. There's no separation, no segregation, no story. It's all lost to the barge down the river, went over to Japan, came back as a top ramen noodle. I mean, you didn't get any benefit from that, right? So being organic, making a brand, putting some identity to it, a little bit of story to it, that's one way that we can get premiums, and that's a way that we can compete on our farm, because I can't grow wheat the way they do out there, but I'm not a 1-acre truck farm either. So it's just different strokes for different folks.
Add something, and I'm one of the panelists who's not at all an ag expert and has no training in ag, but in terms of talking about farmers who can't afford to farm, who are maybe renting farmland and are barely affording to sustain their business. One of the things that the Green New Deal calls for, and this, like Chris said, the Green New Deal is a framework for a whole bevy of policies that would be implemented. So it's not just green energy. Part of the Green New Deal, it would be Medicare for all. So that means public health insurance for everyone, which would bring down healthcare costs for probably all of us in this room. I would venture to bet, if you're not on Medicaid or Medicare already, and that's going to put money in people's pockets who are really struggling to maybe rent the farmland that they want to be farming on. I just saw a study today that said healthcare, the amount of money it costs to run the healthcare system in Canada is 4 times. It costs 4 times more to run our healthcare system in the U.S. than it does in Canada. And so people will have more money in their pockets. I lived in Canada. I was on the Canadian health insurance. And my premium at the time, 10 years ago, was $55 a month, and I had no bills. No medical bills when I went to the doctor, when I went to the clinic. I never received a medical bill. It was $55 a month.
We are losing farmers, and the majority of the farmers in the United States are going to be retiring and moving on, and we have very few to replace them. So what is the Green New Deal doing to support those that maybe are struggling beyond Medicare and things like that? I would hate to see all of these restrictions put on farmers and we lose even more than we're already losing. So what systems are in place, or who needs to come to the table to actually make sure that everyone's represented and not just green farmers, if you will?
Well, and it's an aging population. We need to bring new folks into the farming community. It's also overwhelmingly, I believe, 94% white men who are farmers. We want to bring new communities into farming that maybe haven't traditionally owned farms and operated farms in the United States, and it's something that we have to do. We need at least a large degree of self-sustainability and self-reliance in this country so that we're not beholden to foreign interests. And so that's an opportunity that is addressed in the Green New Deal, along with a lot of other things, is bringing new communities into farming that have never had that opportunity before. And for so much of American history, it's been the story of people moving to cities. But now we are seeing where there are folks, if they had the education, if they had the information, if they had the opportunity, they would go out and farm, especially if it was in a way that would actually help solve one of the greatest threats to humanity.
Just really briefly, I think we just have to incentivize it. I mean, we're going to depend on ag either way. And I know that this is part of the Green New Deal. I remember this little tidbit, but part of it is also good paying jobs in the green sector. And I think that we have to consider farmers one of those as well. If we have the farmers that are still struggling to survive and make ends meet, then they fall under that category of people that need living wages as well.
And so on that, the farmers that are coming in that are new and not from a farm family, the land that is available to them is severely degraded. So we need to be mindful of that when we're putting this framework together, because they'll run into the same issues.
Yeah.
And then the last, did you have something, Rachel, to add to that?
You're right.
No? The last one, we just have a few minutes left. Where is it? It's like the Disneyland one. If all of you could have your fairy tale, if the constructors of the new Farm Bill called you for advice, what would you like to see in the new Farm Bill? And we'll time you 1 minute each.
Oh, maybe I have an opinion. I would get rid of the most of the corn subsidies. I would get rid of, and by way of that is also the subsidized crop insurance program, because basically it's just sand in the boots of a dead man with toothpicks holding his eyes open. I mean, that industry is only supported because the government pays cheap corn to be there. It does not help that many family farms, or shouldn't say family farms, smaller farms. And I would do away with the renewable fuel standard for the ethanol mandate. That's a net zero deal. It just ruins land for putting more corn in to run through our cars. It doesn't do anything. Probably continue the CRP program, though that's also just a cash cow for landowners, but it is good to have the ground in grass. Right now, at least, we don't need it to farm for more wheat or corn. We're awash in that right now. The prices are terrible. Not too much into price supports. I really love the marketplace, and I like supply and demand, because if you artificially support things, it becomes its own drug or addiction, if you will, and those kinds of things, when you artificially lean on these supports, it's like progressive. It gets worse. You need more and more subsidies, and it's terminal. It leads to death of an industry.
I would be incredibly supportive of the CRP program. I would remove it from the FSA because what I've discovered there in working there for the Conservation District was that a lot of their policies were counterproductive to the CRP program. They do things that require one thing and then go out and remove it later. And it's like, this doesn't make sense. So I'm incredibly worried that we're going to see CRP funding cut and over the years. And I get really concerned because there's a limit to it, and it is invaluable, especially in this county where we have what are called HEL lands, H-E-L lands, which are highly erosive soils. And they need to be grassed over and covered up. And I just get really concerned, but anyway.
So we have a couple people asking what CRP is.
It is a Conservation Reserve Program. And it is a direct outgrowth of the New Deal in the 1930s.
And just to echo that, we both of you bring up great points about conserving the land that we currently have, planning for the future. A lot of our subsidies right now, a lot of our strategies for helping businesses or trying to promote growth are essentially on 2 to 4 year cycles, which is not coincidentally election cycles. We need to be planning out decades in advance, and that's what a lot of countries are doing as they slowly start to pass or quickly start to pass us by. When it comes to subsidies, we need to be thinking, are we helping them be self-sufficient and grow and one day not need these subsidies? Or are we just throwing money at an industry because they're lobbying us to attach it to the bill?
Okay, well, once again, I haven't studied the Farm Bill, so I cannot provide any kind of detailed commentary like Joel and Mike did, but I appreciate what you said, Joel, about eliminating the subsidies for corn, and also about not putting our food in our cars. We shouldn't be taking our valuable food and using it to power our cars, especially as we might have less and less arable land. We need our food to feed our people.
And for me, again, I guess I just want to hammer again that access and democratization of new technologies. Things that are going to pay for themselves longer down the road. farmers need access to that. I don't know how we're going to figure it out, but I think that's one of the main things that we need to figure out now. And for a lot of people, I think it really is just about the first step, going down a sustainable path or anywhere you want to take it. It is that help with that first step and just being sure with that, because a lot of farmers can't afford to risk things without assistance or knowing what they're doing.
Great. So I think that wraps up our questions. And I'm going to let the Sunrise Movement take it from here. This is Walker.
Thank you, Erin. All right. I'd like to start with a quick question from the audience to the panel, which is, what can I do to fight for the Green New Deal?
So what we can do, I mean, on top of being here, educating ourselves, we need to support politicians at every single level of the government who are committed to creating a sustainable future with a livable planet and with economic opportunity for everyone. You know, that's part of the beauty of the Green New Deal, is that it's wrapping up. You're welcome to not believe in climate change, because you should still support that Green New Deal. It is opportunity for everyone, particularly people in this district. And so when you volunteer, when you donate, if you have any money, even if it's just sharing things on social media or having those conversations around your dinner table, that's how we get it done.
I think Sunrise Movement can speak really well to that, and that's what you all who are part of the Sunrise Movement have really been advocating for. So you've been leading this as the Sunrise Movement, so I want
to add one more thing, actually, real quick. Just so we can demand that politicians, even at the city level, divest from fossil fuel industries. So right now, they'll take our tax dollars, and for pension funds, for employees, and for a lot of those organizations, they'll invest them in fossil fuel industries and in military-industrial complex-related industries, and then those industries continue to damage our planet. Because guess what? Those stocks tend to do well because you can bet on more war and more pollution pretty reliably over the last 100, 200 years. So we can demand it. You can email them, you write them letters. I promise you, I get letters, I get emails, and they take an effect. They matter. And even if you're just shouting at a wall, like our current congressional representative here in Eastern Washington, where you get a form letter back, it lets them know that you care enough to take a few minutes out. You're probably going to fill out your ballot. You might even donate to their opposition. You might even go out and volunteer.
All right. Well, thank you to everyone who came out tonight, but especially the panelists who courageously shared their vision and wisdom. I'm coming from the perspective of a young person who got really interested in food systems through his interest in bread baking, and it was kind of that angle that interests me most in agriculture. I'm trying to become a plant breeder because I think about myself, the challenge of climate change, and what young people can do. And for me, someone who has a background in hard science and a love of food, plant breeding is kind of where I feel like I fit into that. And just to be a young person these days is to really just stare down the long tunnel of life and see societies around the world in collapse, and the places we love and call home destroyed and destabilized, and the platitudes of generations past ringing hollow. The promise of a Green New Deal, a sweeping social program to decarbonize our economy, create millions of new, good jobs, brought me and many other young people into Sunrise Movement and inspired us to engage in politics for the first time. I'm a science major. I hate politics. It's the reason we at Sunrise brought you all here today. It's a promise that extends across the country, and yes, that includes Walla Walla. Farmers and ranchers here and all across the country are working together to share and implement some of the most inspiring solutions to the climate crisis. However, as many of you already know, and as was discussed here, the average age of a farmer today is 58. Less than 1% of the people in this country grow the food that all of us eat, a fact which should make everyone who's not a farmer very grateful to farmers, and also which should frighten you. When too few have the skills and experience to produce food for our community, our autonomy is threatened. And it's not that my generation doesn't recognize the value and pride of working on the land, or that we don't want to work hard. Farming is simply an untenable career option for too many of my peers. lack of land access, in part through pressure from real estate developers, extractive credit markets that make it difficult to scale a business, and lack of a social safety net and affordable health care forecloses farming as a viable career option for most of us. It's the reason why the sustainable ag world has been dominated by an insular set of upper middle class white folks like myself, unable to reach a mass audience and saddled with elitism. Left unresolved, these barriers to access will cripple our food system and steal the promise of sustainable, self-sufficient rural communities. A Green New Deal will directly invest in American agriculture by funding the infrastructure needed to promote climate-friendly agriculture and by keeping farmers on their land. Not only that, but a Green New Deal as a broad social program will also change the equation that makes farming such a tough sell for my generation. Refunding key institutions like Walla Walla Community College would ensure we have the resources to train the next generation of farmers that will steward our land. Energy efficient, affordable public housing reduces land pressure from developers and gives our community autonomy over a critical part of our everyday lives. Public financing makes it easier to bring our ideas to life in food and agriculture or otherwise, while maintaining community control over the wealth our efforts generate. Federal assistance for new farmers and historically disadvantaged farmers will give us a chance to connect young folks of all backgrounds who want to farm with the land they need to get started. This is the decade of the Green New Deal. It represents the hope of my generation. What it will mean for Walla Walla depends on all of us. So I have something to say to each of you here tonight who are wearing different hats. To the farmers, farm workers, ranchers, and land stewards in the room, we want to thank you for the work you do, both for feeding us and stewarding our land, and we want to ensure that you have a central role in shaping the direction of a Green New Deal for Walla Walla. Feel free to find us after the event and share the challenges you're facing. As a future plant breeder, that's useful information. You can also email us at sunrisewallawalla@gmail.com. To the civic leaders in the room, please consider young people, not only when you fund our schools, I hope, but also when you make decisions that could affect our shared future. We've started taking charge of our own futures, and we're not going away. To the supportive adults in the room, you can donate to Sunrise Movement, and you can help us make community connections. What we have is energy and a sense of urgency conferred by our youth. What we lack are resources, both financial and social. You can help. We're leaving a donation box at our table outside the auditorium, and we will be grateful for whatever you can contribute. Lastly, I address the young people in the audience. Please join Sunrise Movement. We'll need to demand a livable future from powerful people who stand to lose when we win, like fossil fuel corporations, big banks, real estate developers. The only way that large-scale change has ever been achieved, history shows us this, is when we rise up at a mass scale and demand that change. We're having our Decade of the Green New Deal kickoff party on Monday, February 3rd, Reed Campus Center, where we'll watch 2 mini documentaries that highlight the road ahead.
Can we just talk? Can we just talk? Figure out what